Today, me and Chaitanya are going to present our paper, which is on understanding cultural dynamics through jewelry, a case study of Ponchi. So, Ponchi is basically a traditional Indian jewelry worn by both men and women. It is a kind of bracelet or wristlet. However, for the purpose of this study, we'll be looking at Ponchi worn by women in particularly two regions, the present day states of Uttarakhand and western Uttar Pradesh. The reasons for this choice will become clear as we move along. For this paper, we have adopted an ethno-archaeological approach under which we've conducted a two-part analysis. First is to analyze and compare the cultural significance of Ponchi in terms of the marriage rituals and other customs associated with it. Secondly, tracing the possible trade and migration patterns that may have led to the spread of Ponchi. So, before we begin our discussion on Ponchi, let us look at what ethnoarchaeology is or what an ethnoarchaeological approach entails so as to understand the focus of this paper in a better way. So, ethnoarchaeology is a vast and dynamic subfield of archaeology or anthropology. It focuses on the archaeological material implications of human behavior and is important to develop and refine analogies. It seeks to deepen the knowledge and understanding of archaeological records and how they can be better researched, interpreted, as well as explained. Within this broader ethnoarchaeological approach, what we have looked at is how material culture can be used as a tool to understand the process of cultural hybridization in a historical context. So, material culture has been defined by anthropologists as the artifacts made and used by people. Culture, material needs, and human agency affect the design and use of objects. One such example is jewelry, and what makes jewelry important is that it is a portable form of material culture and serves as a marker of individual or cultural identity. Cultural hybridization is the process by which a particular cultural element blends into another culture by modifying the element to fit the new cultural norms. Cultural hybridization manifests itself in material culture, thus leading to material culture hybridization. This is because, along with the intangible aspects of culture, the tangible aspects also get influenced by local environment, needs, and materials. So now let us look at the geographical extent of Ponchi. As you can see in the maps, it is found almost all over the northern Indian subcontinent, starting from Punjab, Sindh and Rajasthan in the west to Bengal in the east. Now the reason why we have chosen Uttarakhand and western Uttar Pradesh for this case study is because Uttarakhand and western Uttar Pradesh form two different geodemographic zones, and despite their geographical proximity, they exhibit different characteristics. Why? Because of topographical and geomorphological differences, the Gangetic plains, with their unvarying topography, fertile lands, and well irrigated plains, support heavy agriculture, while the central Himalayan region, owing to its high elevation and other reasons, support light agriculture and pastoral activities. Moving on to the socio-political context, as you can see in the maps, these regions were unified at different points of time in history under different empires, starting from the Mauryan Empire in circa 250 BCE, followed by the Kushan Empire in the 2nd century CE, then even under the Mughals in the 16th-17th centuries, and finally under the British Empire in the 19th and 20th centuries. From the point of view of this study, however, the early medieval period starting from circa 5th-6th century CE is important. Why? Because we have the process of state formation happening during this period, both in the Rajputana region under the Gujar Pratihars and the subsequent successor states, as well as in Kumaon and Garhwal region. So during this period as well as post this period, there was a considerable movement of population. As you can see in the second map, the Gujar population, which originated in the western part of the Indian subcontinent, spread to the northern, eastern, and the southern regions over the years. Likewise, there was a movement of Brahmin and Rajput population too as the process of state formation unfolded. So, what do the genetic studies tell us? Many present-day Rajput and Brahmin populations in Kumaon and Garhwal claim to be immigrants. A genetic difference between the indigenous and immigrant groups of the Himalayas has been confirmed by genetic studies. A high genetic affinity is also noticed among the Gujars, Rajputs, Brahmins, Jat Sikh and Baniya populations of the northern Indian subcontinent, suggesting a common gene pool. and a common origin. So, to sum up this section, the following points can be inferred. The regions under study were connected by trade routes. For example, we have the Uttar Prath connecting Takshila in the northwest to Tamralipti in Bengal in the east. Similarly, we have the Trans-Himalayan trade going on, which connected Tibet and the northern Indian subcontinent. And this trade route was very important up till the 19th and the 20th century. Secondly, there was a significant movement of population from the west, that is Rajasthan and Gujarat, to the Gangetic Plains as well as to the north in the Himalayas. Thus, the possibility of cultural exchange and subsequent cultural hybridization along these routes seems plausible.
So the Ponchi is known by different names in different regions. It's called Paunchi, Punchi, Ponchi, Kutbi, Punchi or Gajre. However, the basic design remains the same. It's a lot of bead-like ornaments which are bound to a cloth band, and then there is a knotting clasp to clasp it tightly to your wrist. We did not find any specific tribe or community wearing the Ponchi. It's fairly widespread, and the Ponchi is also worn by both men and women. Now the Ponchi is found in different types and materials. The type is usually determined by the shape of the bead. So for example, elaichi dana, as you can see, if the beads are cardamom seed shaped, lehsan ki ponchiyan, if they are shaped like the cloves of garlic, and there is also something called chuhadatti or rat's teeth, which we were not able to find. In different materials, the beads can be made entirely out of gold, entirely out of silver. They can be made out of lac, which are then filled with lac and then covered with gold. They can be made using glass beads, or they can be gems studded. In terms of the primary source references of the Ponchi, the first one which we find probably is from the Shunga sculptures. These are 2nd to 1st century BCE Yakshi sculptures in West Bengal. And while we cannot be sure, but these seem to be wearing something like the Ponchi on their wrists. More concrete evidence comes from the 16th century Hamza Nama, a Persian epic which is illustrated in Akbar's time in India, and women are seen wearing the Ponchi in some of its scenes. Jeweled Ponchis are also mentioned in later Mughal sources like the Tuzuk-e-Jahangiri and Alamgir Nama, and far more concrete evidence is found in 18th century Jaipur gold workshops or zargar khanas, where these Ponchis are made set with emeralds. To go on to our sample analysis, we have 3 samples taken for close consideration. The first is from Amroha, Uttar Pradesh, Western Uttar Pradesh. The second is from Kumaon, Uttarakhand, and the third is from Nabha, Punjab. Now our focus will be on the first 2 samples, but the third sample we have taken to show a sort of a continuity that, well, in the medieval era the royalty was wearing it, and here in the early 20th century, from where this sample dates from, the princely state of Nabha, their chief minister, is also wearing it. So this is one example of a man wearing the Ponchi. The rest 2 examples were worn by women. Now here is a tabular depiction of the Ponchi, 3 samples we had collected. What I want you to focus on is the date line. So all of them date back to roughly the same time, early 20th century, and the inheritance pattern. Considering the inheritance pattern, we will try to put the first 2 samples in context of where they are. So, the first sample from Amroha, Uttar Pradesh, is inherited, when we found out during interviews, it was inherited from the natal home by the daughter at the time of her marriage. So, her mum gave it to her. Further interviews also revealed that this was a part of her dowry to the home, to the marital home. Now, if we put it in context, the practice of dowry, as has been postulated by the scholars, economically it arises as a sort of compensation, a compensation given by the bride's family to the groom's family, as women are considered this economic burden and their labor is not considered important enough to be of any value in these societies. Now, why does this arise? If we see the regional geography of Amroha, which is why we said it in context, it is plains, it has an intense agriculture economy, heavy implements can be used, which diminishes the perception of a woman's labor. Now we apply it backwards, and this means that the women are seen as an economic burden, hence the reason of dowry, and hence our Ponchi is being given as a form of dowry from the natal home to the marital home. the tables are turned in the next sample, which is from Kumaon in Uttarakhand. Now, this was inherited by the bride from her marital home at the time of marriage under a practice called Sansu Bhaint. Scholars have said that this policy is part of bride price and Asura marriage according to Manusmriti. Now, bride price arises when the woman or the bride here is seen as an important resource in agriculture and reproduction, and hence a compensation has to be paid to the bride's family from the groom's family for taking away this resource, or here the bride, in a way. This is again tied to the regional geography. The regional geography is hilly and there is sparse use of heavy implements, agriculture is harsh, and there is also pastoralism. So every person's labor is valued more, including women's labor, and hence when we applied it backwards, her labor is seen as an important resource, which is why bride price is paid by the groom's family to the bride's family, which is how the Ponchi is given to the girl by her mother-in-law. Now that we see that both regions had quite different inheritance patterns, we obviously wonder that how did the Ponchi get there and other cultural forms did not. So we need to see that both regions were almost contiguous. Amroha is in western Uttar Pradesh and Kumaon is in eastern Uttarakhand. Both regions are geographically contiguous, even if their terrains are different. There were pilgrimage routes, there were trans-Himalayan trade routes, and especially from the 18th century onwards, the Afghan Rohillas in western Uttar Pradesh, where Amroha lies, they consolidated their state called Rohilkhand, and they significantly gave impetus to this trans-Himalayan trade from Tibet for gold, borax and other things. As you can see in this map, you can locate Rohilkhand and Kumaon contiguous to each other. Other material cultures also traveled, not the jewelry only. So for example, you have Maru Gurjar architecture. This architectural style starts off in 10th century Rajasthan and Gujarat. And by the 12th century, you have examples of it in Uttarakhand. Even though there is no direct political authority, it has been said that owing to the donor statues over there, that pilgrims from Gujarat and other states commissioned these temples. Other than that, the spread of miniature painting styles in the late medieval era, the Pahari school of miniatures from the Rajasthani and Mughal schools, and oral traditions such as Chandravali, very popular in central India, which then spreads to the hills, are also examples of other material culture trade. So what are our conclusions from this? We can, by putting the Ponchi into context, we can see that despite geographic proximity, trade and migrations, and also political unification at times, while it allows the Ponchi to migrate to different regions, the regional geography still affects and interacts with the material culture and makes it adapt to the local environment. Here in this case, the inheritance patterns, which are quite different in both regions. This means that the material culture has hybridized, it has adapted, it has changed to the local traditions, even though its material and technique of make might be the same. This can corroborate theories of influence and migrations of people, ethnic, linguistic, whatever. And this can also point out that even though there are migrations, there is not a wholesale adoption of customs from one region to another, but also change.